Hello and welcome back to Signal Over Noise. In today's episode, let's talk money, and more specifically, that feeling of money being hard to get hold of and then slipping through your fingers all too easily. Or maybe that's not strong enough. Maybe you find yourself in an economic situation where it feels like you need to run just to stand still, a treadmill that won't slow down. Sound about right? Yeah, me too. Today's episode is an exploration of why it feels that way, what the large-scale forces are that keep you poor, and how you and I can move forwards towards eventual financial independence, and maybe even stepping off the treadmill, or at least gaining control over the speed setting so that we can walk rather than run. We will cover off on modern monetary policy, or printing money, inflation, or £100 going less and less far each year, how modern representative democracies get in the way of sound long-term financial management, and then we'll talk about the three-step individual plan for freeing yourself from this big monetary cliff we all seem to be heading towards, and three hopeful, though not fully developed ideas for how we might start moving our entire society in a different direction. Let's begin with a game of Monopoly. Okay, so imagine we're all playing one huge game of Monopoly. We're all dealt a little bit of money and we set off on laps of the board acquiring assets and charging each other for using them. The player nearest the box gets to be the banker. Why? Because he says he's good with numbers and he's sat by the box. Play proceeds, assets are bought, rent is paid, tax happens, the banker keeps the lid on the box. At some point, he learns that he could just shake the box at will and more money just falls out. He does it. What happens? Well, nobody's going to sell property for what they would have previously. Asking prices increase or inflate. Now, literally all developed countries with control of their own currency have learnt that by separating paper money from something resource constrained, like the promise of an ounce of gold in exchange for that piece of paper, they can loosen and lift the lid off the box and shake and shake it and shake it and shake it, and more money just comes out. Inflation, or price increases, is a necessary consequence if this box shaking is not matched by a commensurate increase in board size and the properties or assets it contains. Back to our game. The banker learns to shake the box whenever he is running short of money and spends a decent chunk of that new money on himself, distorting the game in his favor. So we, the players of the game, decide we need to put a bit of pressure and control on this banker. Maybe have an elected person that has the banker's ear and we'll get to sit next to him. We pick someone who seems nice and fair and decent and tell him he has 4 minutes to prove himself or he's going to get replaced. This second player, let's call him Minister, has the ear of the banker. He's also sat near the money box, a lucrative and powerful position within the game. So he figures he needs to get chosen again in 4 minutes. How does he do this? Well, he promises all the players of the game more money and whispers into the banker's ear, shake the box. If he shakes the box at the right time and gets the money into all the players' hands before they realize the value of the money has just contracted again, they re-elect him. If he times it poorly, they elect someone else who promises to make the financial situation better for each of the players involved that vote for them. Prices get bid up and properties become ever more expensive. The banker can shake the box whenever he wants. Some players get excited at the vast amounts of money on offer for the property they bought on the cheap, back when the game was in its early stages. They sell up, they feel immensely wealthy and set about travelling. But rents are higher than they remember back in the good old days, and so are prices on just about everything. Soon, they're forced to either retreat into what little property they've retained, or to ask the minister for somewhere to take shelter. The minister, ever keen to get re-elected, obliges. And he funds this obligation with extra money from the banker, or he borrows it from a player with a lot of assets, on the promise that next time he goes around the board, he will pay £105 back for the 100 he has just borrowed. And so long as the minister moves sufficiently slowly, he can be re-elected before paying the £105 back to the wealthy player. This is called hyperbolic discounting, or mortgaging the future for the sake of the present. 4-minute or 4-year election cycles foster that sort of behaviour. Front-load the rewards and defer payments to the next minister. The problem here is that the game rumbles on and tomorrow keeps on arriving. The minister owes more and more money, and as the wealthy game players expect to make money on lending to the minister must always pay more money than he receives. How can he make up the difference? Well, taxation and asking the banker to shake the box. Taxation can be collected on basically any aspect of the game. Roll a 7, pay some tax. Pay rent, pay some tax. Buy a property, pay some tax. But game players will resent this taxation, or being charged to exist and to participate in the game, if they feel they are giving the minister a lot more than he gives out in return. So they ask for more out and less in. The minister has an election in a minute, so he decides to spend more money out than he takes in his taxes. The difference, and because he doesn't have enough to match the borrowing, or box shaking. The minister reaches for his trusty calculator and punches in 100 and multiplies it by 1.05 to figure out just how expensive that 5% the wealthy players are charging him to borrow that cash will be. He'll pay £5 on his 100. However, he doesn't have the cash and needs another 100 to keep the players well shoed and continuing to travel around the board, thinking happily about just how hard they are going to re-elect our dear minister. He borrows more money without paying off either the debt or the interest on what he had previously borrowed. The amount he now owes begins to get away from him, kind of like pressing 1.05 multiplied by 1.05 a few times in a row on that trusty calculator. If that minister was running a country that had been playing this sort of game for a long time, he might end up owing a lot of money. If he was, say, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, then he'd be on the hook for around £120 billion per year in just the interest payments on the debt. Were he the President of the USA, his 2024 interest payment, according to Pew Research data, would have been just short of $900 billion. Understandably, the game players are beginning to feel a little bit like what they're getting out doesn't match what they're putting in. Now, back to Monopoly. The game's been going on a while, and some of the players have brought little players into the game. They receive no cash handout. Instead, the minister pays to educate them for a time. Then, the new players borrow money to further educate themselves on the game of Monopoly, and then enter the game young, energetic, and basically totally without the capital needed to purchase any of the good quality assets on the board. They must hustle to make money, because that's hard without assets. They must pay rent, as there is nothing left to buy, and the currently strong players in the game don't want to open up the board to more assets, as they think this might weaken their position and tank the value of their current assets. These new young whippersnappers may well feel driven to pursue riskier avenues for making money, or creative ways not to pay tax to the minister. They are, of course, not the first players to try this, and unlike the wealthy older players, are less able to recruit Monopoly tax consultants to do this effectively and legally. Still, their situation is not a promising one. Some, knowing that every lap is likely to be financially calamitous and potentially ruin us, stop thinking about future laps altogether and go all in on enjoying their current lap. If they do make it to the next one, they'll repeat. And repeat. And repeat. Others are quickly stripped of what little they have and either must depend on the minister and his friend that likes to shake the box to stay in the game, or they exit the game. Exiting the game can take many forms, but there is one seemingly universal truth of all board games. The board is never flipped by someone keenly engaged, competitive, and invested in the continuation of the game to see just how well they can do. Instead, board flippers are the newly eliminated and those that never got the invite to start with, and occasionally those just out to enjoy a good tantrum. This game of Monopoly continues all around us. We did not choose when we came to the table, and none of us, except the minister, had the banker's ear and told him directly that we thought it a good idea to keep shaking the box. But through circumstantial pressures and the nice shiny idea of new things and, better yet, free things, we did not stop him and continued to repeatedly elect ministers that would not rein him in. Now, at present, there is no other game in town. There are only different Monopoly boards being played out elsewhere with different rules on taxes, borrowing, and conjuring money out of thin air. I mean, honestly, if money did grow on trees, it would be an enormous inconvenience to our modern monetary systems because that would actually slow the whole thing down. So, what's the end product? Well, it feels like your money is melting because the person with the power to melt it loses nothing and gains plenty by doing so. And he is ably supported and backed up by the man in his ear, who we elected. Now, that might sound a little depressing, and frankly it is, but it's also a reasonably accurate model of the financial reality many of us face. After many decades of the government spending more than it earns, for example, the UK has done this 47 years out of the past 50, borrowing against our future and plucking money from thin air, money is worth a lot less than it was and keeps receding in value. So how can one extricate themselves from the situation? Let's get into that now. First, a 3-step individual solutions playbook. Then 3 hopeful ideas about what we might do collectively. The 3 steps that are super easy to say and rather harder to implement are fee, su, fo, or funnel in, swat up, funnel out. 1. Funnel in. Okay, because money is melting, you're going to need quite a lot of it to get into a decent position on the board. Now, entrepreneurship podcasts would have you become an entrepreneur. Writing podcasts might have you aim to become the next J.K. Rowling. I'm not here to say what the right type of funnel is for you. That'll be based on your unique specific skill set and opportunities available to you. But some people do actually possess these sort of long levers they can pull in their lives to make a lot of money without having to venture into Hail Mary, risk-it-all projects. I've known nurses to go to the outback in Australia and triple their earnings, plus having all their living expenses and travel expenses paid. Why? Because nobody signs up to that job without those inducements. If you want to make your skills earn you more, consider this question. What can I hold my nose and get on with that others would run a mile from? Perhaps it's working night shifts, moving for work, or doing something unglamorous and unflattering that others wouldn't be caught dead doing. However, with labour being a highly taxed form of earning when compared with, say, business profits or capital gains, you may still find yourself needing to have a really good go at entrepreneurship. What's the business model here? Well, I'm not here to give you a specific tried and tested business model, but I will give you these 2 aphorisms that I think are pretty broad-based and useful to everyone. Identify a problem many of us face, solve it, make a business. That's 1. Number 2, the internet is the great multiplier, particularly for those of us lacking the capital to build and ship real products. So, sell digital products or information on the airwaves and buy dirt, assets that will hold their value and exceed the rate of inflation. Next, swat up. Look, you don't need to wait until you have a successful funnel in to get learning about your asset owning options, but you do need to do your own research before you crack on investing or buying. Why? It's scary, and there is the possibility of significant losses. I mean, there must be some reason why British households are currently right now holding £2.2 trillion in cash in the bank, even as it's being melted. So what are your options? Well, with stock trading apps and fractional shares, anyone with an internet connection and a bank account can now consider stocks, shares, exchange-traded funds, government bonds, commodities, and in some cases, depending on your provider, cryptocurrencies. They also offer property or real estate funds for those that think housing is a good bet but cannot afford to take the first step and secure a deposit on a property of their own for now. UK housing, for example, has outperformed inflation practically every year for the last 50 years, and the US stock market has beaten inflation by an average of 6.5% per year over the last 150 years. Some assets are riskier, with lots of potential for reward. Others are safer, but with more limited upside. The good news is it's never been easier to learn, with loads of decent quality personal finance YouTubers and podcasters out there, the particular focus on those that are not selling you anything directly, and plenty of big financial media organizations like Bloomberg and the Financial Times also putting out a lot of free content in the form of podcast. Step 3, funnel out. If your money's melting, sat where it is, you want to make sure it's not sat there for too long. Instead, you want to make regular payments into your favored asset class or classes. The longer your money sits as money, the less stuff it will buy you. The sooner you manage to convert it into assets that will outperform the rate of inflation or watering down of the value of your money, the better it will help you at buying liberation from running on that treadmill. And 4, a bonus step. Financial independence is really all about time independence. Are you sufficiently wealthy that you can afford to dictate how you spend your precious time on this earth whilst meeting the needs and wants of you and your nearest and dearest? Well, some of us just simply can't build a big enough funnel in. So it might sound a bit bleak, but actually maybe there's a bit of optimism here with of being able to simulate wealth and retirement, or the freedom to pick and choose how we spend our waking hours, by finding a career or profession we enjoy so much that we'd actually be willing to do it for very little or no money at all. And if we compare this with avoiding lifestyle creep or keeping our cost of living and those things that we deem necessary and normal much lower than our incomes, then we can year over year continue to generate funds to funnel out into assets, albeit at a slower rate. But if you found a true vocation that you are passionate about and would do for next to no money, then it'll be much easier to sustain this long, low, slow process of funneling in, swatting up and funneling out than it would be for any of us who don't enjoy our work. Next, this bit is a little bit more pie in the sky, is the Collective Solutions Playbook for the UK. Firstly, we need people with skin in the game who all feel they have a realistic shot at winning the game, whatever that means to them. That is, not beating others necessarily, but achieving that which they would consider a good outcome for themselves and those around them. We need owning good quality, safe, warm and secure housing to be a realistic ambition, or perhaps more radically, we need a rental system that we all believe in and trust to offer affordable, good quality housing to most people on most budgets and to permit social mobility so that we can put our skills to work where they're most needed. Society like the Swiss have managed to create. We need a society in which people can be at least somewhat future-focused and can start saving now for an imagined 20-odd years of economic inactivity later in life. And perhaps, a little more controversially, we're going to need there to be a large enough generation beneath us that we don't break their collective backs by asking too much of them to support us in our older years, such that they all up sticks and head to play another game of Monopoly somewhere else. Maybe Dubai or somewhere else where you can opt out of paying tax or but entirely. How do we do this? Well, I won't pretend to have all the answers, but let me have a quick go at each of these three issues or themes of housing, investing in our futures, and making sure there are generations to follow us that do not flee the pressures of our overburdensome state. Firstly, housing. I think we're going to have to clip the wings of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard mentality. Why? We need more good quality housing. To illustrate just how slow we're moving, I'd like to talk about infrastructure and the building of high-speed rail. In the UK, in the last 25 years, we've managed to open 109 kilometres of high-speed rail, linking Dover to London St Pancras, allowing the Eurostar to run at high speeds all the way from London to Paris. Like I've said, this section of railway is 109 kilometres long. That's all we've done and opened in the last 25 years. Since then, we've also spent billions of pounds and years of political discourse working on a high-speed railway line from London to Manchester via Birmingham. None of it is open. China, on the other hand, has built 40,000 kilometres of high-speed rail since the turn of the millennium. How? Less quarrelling and quibbling about where, what, when, and how. Now, okay, China's hardly a paradise and a panacea. What about closer to home? Well, Spain, which has a smaller economy overall, as measured by GDP, and a much smaller GDP per capita, or economic output per person, has added around 2,000 kilometres of high-speed rail since the turn of the millennium. France, with which the Brits have something of a sibling rivalry, has added 1,000 kilometres. So there we are. France has added 10 times as much high-speed rail as us in the same period of time, 20 times in the case of Spain, and 400 times more high-speed rail has been rolled out in China than the UK over the last 25 years. The lesson here is that Britain has got a problem with getting shit done. And perhaps we were oblivious to it for a long while because Britain was the first country to industrialise and use this to extract enormous amounts of wealth from its colonies. So it basically had a massive economic head start on the rest of the world. It could afford policy after policy that got in the way of development because it was already so developed. Well, nowadays, near-peer economies are accelerating out ahead of us, and previous non-competitors like Poland are on track to overtake Britain soon, GDP per capita. What else needs done other than stamping on the toes of a few poor NIMBYs? Well, we need to stop printing so much money and growing the national debt. If current house price trajectories continue, as they have been in London, then the average house price, which is currently just short of £500,000 and was around £80,000 30 years ago will be £4.4 million in 30 years' time. Under current mortgage lending requirements, we would be talking about a deposit of around £500,000 to £1 million. Now, new entrants into the workforce who own none of the sort of hoovering up the wealth type of assets that do well on a monopoly board simply will not be able to raise the deposit, and most average earners will struggle to earn the value of one average house across their entire working lifetime. The only feasible ways to make the maths work are ones that will be politically and socially unacceptable. Intergenerational mortgages are unlikely to take off here, as they have done in Japan, because our definition of fairness surely does not allow for massive amounts of intergenerational debt to be passed down through the accident of birth. Printing money is obviously inflationary for prices, as we've discussed, and growing the national debt is a problem because as the government's need to fund debt interest payments increases, so will our overall tax burden. So each of us will take home less from each paycheck and therefore have less both to invest and to spend. Great. Next, investing in the future. One of George Orwell's best ever quotes, in my opinion, is, "Poverty is an obliteration of the future. At its most extreme, poverty and associated disease are lethal, so literally obliterative of the future. In its more modern Western form, poverty figuratively obscures the focus because the impoverished become totally caught up in the moment, thinking, feeling, and acting from moment to moment, without any spare emotional or mental bandwidth with which to comprehend the future and plan for it." In the famous 1928 personal finance book, The Richest Man in Babylon, the author suggests we pay ourselves 10% of our pay packets to put towards some dream of ours. This then means we must budget to live well within the other 90%. To do this, we must have future aspirations or dreams. With this 90%, we're supposed to split it 3 ways: 30% paying our debts, 30% investing, and 30% living on. An obvious problem here is that the amount that people are spending in rent is just far too high. Call me Sammy the Socialist, but perhaps we need the government to get involved as a house builder, or at least a low-cost lender to people that want to build houses where they're wanted. If we can drive down rents as a proportion of earnings, then people will have more money to invest in the future, and investing becomes ever more interesting the more we have involved, because what we earn tends to be percentages of what we've put in. If you have £1 invested, then no matter what the percentage, you're unlikely to change your own future financial horizons. If you have £1 million invested, then quite a small percentage could really be very beneficial and useful. The next part of investing in our future is trust. We have an issue with trust in institutions, be they government or financial, or both. In this post-truth, social media, algorithm fear factory, a lot of us do not trust institutions. This needs fixing, perhaps through pan-political party guarantees to safeguard certain long-term savings products, such as stocks and shares ISAs, from future tax rates to get people investing in their own futures. And, just as importantly, attention. We've never lived so long, yet cared so little for the future. Why? In my opinion, we've allowed ourselves to become addicted to instant gratification through abundant access to social media, Uber Eats, Amazon Prime Now, and other services that have abolished the need to wait and be patient. Patience and deferred gratification and long-term planning are skills that need to be honed, developed, trained, and valued. I don't have a route map beyond dumb phones, reading books, and building other bricks of evidence in a wall that shows us that slow, hard-earned gratification can be as good or superior to easy, cheap fixes. And lastly, and perhaps most controversially, populating the future. Firstly, shout out to all the mums and dads all the way back to the very frickin' beginning of time. We wouldn't be here without you. The selfless and courageous decisions you made to open yourselves up to all the good, bad, ugly, and sublime of raising children is something on which we all rely. What's the problem? Well, economically speaking, the issue is that the UK, the US, and essentially all countries outside of sub-Saharan Africa are having children at less than the fertility rate per woman of 2.1 needed to sustain a stable population, with the 0.1 accounting for those that do not make it to reproductive age. The UK and the US are around the 1.6 mark, meaning each generation, if this rate holds, will be just over 2/3 the size of the previous one. Now, most Western governments provide health, social care, and a majority of the state pension through a pay-as-you-go current account system that uses current tax income, borrowing, and conjuring money out of thin air to pay for current expenditure. As each generation gets smaller, the number of taxpayers per person drawing a state pension and using plenty of health and social care services skews to fewer and fewer taxpayers' shoulders to carry the load, thus increasing the incentive to get out from underneath the weight. For a while, we have compensated for our low fertility rates by importing labour, something you may have heard called immigration. Now, when this isn't paired with assimilating into the local culture and adopting its norms and values, it tends not to be that popular politically. It's also not sustainable long-term because the countries these people are coming from share similar or lower fertility rates. How can we solve it? Well, there's a question, one which the South Korean, Taiwanese, and Japanese governments have been discussing openly and extensively and funding for a long time, given their aging societies and dwindling fertility rates. And, well, not much seems to work, but one big outlier is the case of Georgia in Eastern Europe and the Orthodox Church there. There, the leader of the church recognized low fertility rates as an issue of national importance back in 2007. And being something of a rock star in this highly religious country, he promised to personally baptize every third and successive child born to each set of parents. The result was an increase in fertility rates from 1.7 per woman to 2.3. Why? Well, because the dude, Patriarch Ilya II, is basically a celebrity, and associating childbirth with him made it a desirable thing. Perhaps a secular British equivalent would be that every third or successive baby would get a selfie with Harry Styles, or perhaps a signed postcard from David Attenborough. The point I'm trying to make is that if you change the incentive structure and attach prestige and value on having children, then people are more likely to do it than if you take away prestige and values and disincentivize having children. And I think pro-natalist policies are going to become politically normalized in the UK, as they have been in East Asia soon. So we need moderates, centrists, and progressives entering into and engaging in the conversation, rather than vacating this space for the more authoritarian voices to own. Anyway, all of these societal systems level changes are going to be extremely difficult, and for some, extremely bitter to swallow. Nobody wants a high-speed railway line running through their garden, or worse, through the space they used to call kitchen. But the UK needs at least some new railway lines and other infrastructure projects if we are to meet the hopes, dreams, and expectations of our younger generations who also dream of home ownership and social mobility. Getting people to look past the present into the future is no small matter, and the penny will drop whenever it drops. And everyone should absolutely have their own say as to whether or not they personally have children. But a world with young people and the energy and ideas they bring is a brighter one than without. And older people, particularly those that lack family members willing to step up, will come to rely on the taxes of young strangers if they too are to take their turn having a state pension and a state-provided health and social care system. Lastly, on a personal level, the economic treadmill is in full motion. Loose monetary policy, something we keep on voting for, causes the treadmill to spin ever faster. The way off is, in my opinion, to get good at making money, avoid the temptation of nihilistic or fatalistic doom spending, and instead use it to acquire the sorts of assets that hoover up the coming waves of loose monetary policy. Build a funnel to bring it in, hold on to it long enough for you to learn what assets, be they stocks, shares, property, land, crypto, commodities, or whatever you believe will work, or perhaps investing in furthering your own skill set. Then deploy at least some of your money into these assets. Otherwise, inflation will melt your money, then your legs, then your mind. I'm sorry the system is the way that it is. I don't particularly like it much either, but that is the lay of the land, so far as I see it. The societal changes I have briefly and vaguely sketched out don't appear to be coming anytime soon. So you, dear listener, need to control the controllables and figure out how you can get yourself off the treadmill, or at least control the local speed settings and bring it down to something sustainable. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please like the show or give us a rating, and we hope to see you back here same time, same place next week. For now, thank you, be well, and do good.